Today is the 14th day of April. It's a Friday in 2023. And we welcome you to our Chapter 49 podcast. And we try to keep it a weekly podcast as much as we can. My name is Larry Landon. I'm a volunteer in communications and a retiree, producing this podcast for, gosh, it's almost 3 years now, I think, Duncan, and we've been doing this. Duncan Giles is with me. He's the president of NTU Chapter 49. Chapter 49 represents most IRS employees in the state of Indiana. So welcome again, Duncan.
As always, Larry, good to be with you. And even though we're both a little under the weather, we are persevering and pushing on.
And we're headed toward the disabled list, I think, but we're still we're barely active, I guess. Game time decisions on this stuff right now. But at least we're here, and we are able to at least get this thing done today. I don't know about you. It's really sad because I haven't been feeling well. And when you're not feeling well and the weather is so nice, you don't feel like going outside. I mean, here in the Midwest, it's just been spectacular weather the last few days.
Yeah, it certainly has. But apparently by Sunday, it's going to be dipping down, very cold again. So as I like to say, Indiana weather, you don't like it, wait 15 minutes, it'll change.
And yeah, change is on the way, I'm afraid. But anyway, we hope the weather's good wherever you are, and you're enjoying the outdoors to the best of your ability. And with that, let's move into our subjects for today. It seems that for some reason there's this huge, how do I put it, controversy about telework, and it's the controversy comes this way. There seem to be some people in Congress who are upset that customer service maybe isn't as good as it should be in places like the Social Security Administration, IRS. We've upped the ante, but still probably not where everybody wants us to be. Other agencies as well, and it seems that there are certain people in Congress who are blaming telework on this. And I'm kind of wondering where that's coming from, because I don't see any data on that. If there's any reason for customer service not being where it should be, it has to do with, I don't know, funding, staffing, maybe something like that. I don't know. Anyway, but we had a very interesting announcement from the Office of Management and Budget, and the Biden administration has been very friendly dealing with federal unions and agencies and getting them funded and so forth. But this was an interesting situation because OMB sent out a message which seemed to sort of say, well, maybe federal agencies should start bringing people back into the office more. That got a lot of attention, but yet when I started reading some of the comments by people who are normally federal employee advocates, they're saying it's not really such a big deal after all. You've read this information. What does it mean, if anything? Will it have any impact on IRS or any other agency you're aware of in terms of being able to use telework as a result of this OMB announcement that just came out yesterday?
The short answer is no. The longer answer is be it public or private, there's a big pushback right now for remote working or teleworking to be greatly reduced. And I don't understand where that comes from. If it's not forward facing, if it's not somebody who has to be there in front of the public, what is the big deal about where someone works from, as long as the work is getting done? That's the big thing. If you don't have to be there in person, then why should you have to? Now, people have said, well, OMB is saying this, and people in Congress are talking about pulling us from telework, and what are we going to do? Well, we have a national agreement, and the national agreement spells out how often people get to telework and who gets to telework. And unless there's an executive order, which there hasn't been, and I don't foresee being one, we're going to be able to continue to do teleworking as we have been. There have been talks in the works about expanding telework. I expect those to continue to go forward. So for us in the IRS and for other federal government agencies, again, as long as it's not somebody who has to have face-to-face contact with taxpayers, because we all want to serve the taxpayers. That's evident by everybody I've ever talked to in our agency and other agencies, especially ones that NTU represents. If it's in person, everybody understands that, yeah, telework is going to be greatly curtailed because your job is to speak to people in person, to talk to them in person. But if it's something that can be done via phone, via teleconference, via Teams meetings, things of that nature, what does it matter whether you're in an office location or whether you're at home? It should not matter.
I think this idea that customer service has suffered because of telework. I think there's this idea on the part of some people that if, let's say, a customer service rep doing telephone work is working out of the home, that somehow they're not working as hard or they're not getting their work done. And yet, you and I both know that there are ways to monitor how people are doing, whether they're in an office or at home. So it really doesn't make a great deal of difference. So I'm really worried about some people who seem to be making this argument. Now, there's others like the mayor of Washington, D.C. She's upset for obvious reasons because, from what I've heard, D.C. is not a ghost town, but it's a lot less active than it used to be. And you spent some time there, you know how that is. But I just wonder if there's a lot of misinformation or disinformation coming out about just how valuable telework is, and I can't understand where this is coming from. This is somehow hurting customer service quality.
Yeah, if there's an issue with people not doing their job on telework, and we've seen where this has happened, people are called back into the office, and that's the way it's should be. That's the way it is according to our contract. There are ways to fix that, but that's a small minority of employees. The vast majority of employees are more productive when they're teleworking. There's less leave used. There's less FMLA used. They don't have to commute. They don't have to usually go out for lunch. They can have something from home, so they're close by. So it really lends itself to a better work-life balance for everyone. And the bottom line is, for the American taxpayers, the work is still getting done. You're going to always have some of these people who, it worked fine for me back in the 1970s, so why doesn't it work well the same way now? Well, it's a different world. Technology's improved it. And if you can do a job remotely, why in the world shouldn't you be able to do so?
And I think it's important that you mentioned something earlier I'd like to just highlight, and that IRS and NTU have a contract. And in that contract, it sets out the rules for telework. And that's a 5-year contract with, I think, it's a reopener, and for the midterm, it's unlikely that would come back up again. So I don't think there's anything on the horizon that would change the telework rules in IRS. Is that a fair thing to say?
Yeah, I have not heard anything from any executives in any division saying that it's basically not working for them. Again, there's always going to be pockets of people in management who have to feel the need to see their employees. They want to be there, want to see them working. But, the vast majority, the ones who are leaders instead of managers, know that, your people are going to be doing their best when they're most satisfied in their job, and most are satisfied with doing, at the very least, a telework schedule where they only have to come in a minimal amount of time.
I would have to think, and this is just a question for you, and as somebody who's been on a national negotiating team as a chapter leader in the state of Indiana, the chapter president, uh, I would have to say, based on everything you know, don't you think that telework has a tremendous impact on employee retention, first of all, and secondly, the ability to attract people as we start hiring more people?
It's incredibly so. One of the things that we're very concerned about is, you want to, and we've seen it, where people who have not been performing as they should on telework are being brought back into the office, and they're saying, "Oh no, we're not coming back in full time. We can't do that." Because of the pandemic, the patterns have totally changed. People's perceptions have totally changed. And so it's going to be, this is the wave of the future. For as many people that don't like it, And I understand exactly where the mayor of DC is coming from. She's worried about businesses in her town because many less people are showing up in the actual office buildings in federal buildings in Washington D.C. since they can do the work remotely. So it's understandable for cases like that, but for people who say I have to see my employees, they have to be out in front of me, so I can basically physically touch them, so to speak. That type of thinking is very 1990s to 2000s, and it's going to go by the wayside sooner rather than later. They're not going to be able to put this genie back in the bottle in either the public or the private sector.
Nobody liked having a pandemic. Trust me, and having had COVID myself, I don't think it was a good thing. But one thing it did is it sort of swept away some of the arguments management had in terms of, well, for example, there's no way we could, from a technical point of view, ever put customer service reps in their homes. Can't be done. Guess what? We found out, Duncan. It could be done.
It can be done. And that's what happens with a lot of these types of big life changing situations like COVID was. Innovations come out of that and progress is made. And people who fight that progress are going to be looking at it going, okay, eventually it's going to be a losing battle.
Let's move on to something that we always have to talk about this time of year. We've already talked about it once, and let's bring it up again. People who are working for IRS have a very high level of expectations in terms of tax compliance. The tax deadline is coming up. Let's just remind people what that means if you're working for this agency.
Yeah, one of the things that one of the special gifts that you have working for the IRS is that you are held to a higher standard. We all are taxpayers, absolutely. Um, but you need to file your taxes on time, which this year is going to be on the 18th of April. So on Tuesday is the actual date you need to have those done by. And if at all possible, if you owe, to have those paid in full. Now, do you have the right to do an installment agreement if you can't pay your taxes? Absolutely. There are going to be some questions about that, but that is absolutely allowed. But please, 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 please make sure to file your taxes by the due date, or at the very least do an extension. And if you're going to owe, pay as much as you can, if not in full, by the due date before, and then file your tax return by the extension, because we don't want to have employees dealing with what's called ETC, Employee Tax Compliance Branch, takes this stuff very seriously. They look at these things, and for the most part, they're not very forgiving. And so then it goes to your manager for the manager to interview you, and then it goes to labor relations to see what they want to do. And it's just a big hassle that we hope employees will avoid. So again, the main thing is file by the due date. If at all possible, pay if you owe, pay in full by the due date.
Yes, I've seen this from both sides as a union rep and of course as a manager. And it's amazing to me that there are still people that somehow don't understand this. I don't know about you. When I worked in toll free, I would get people calling me who were convinced that if you worked for the IRS, you didn't have to pay your taxes. When, as
I
you and I,
remember getting a few of those.
oh, they thought we were somehow accepted as, oh no, the total opposite is true. We're not tax compliant. We're out the door, I think that's just very important. And if you're, the main thing is get your tax return filed on time and pay it. And if you can't pay it, pay what you can and get it paid as soon as you can. But that make that a priority to get it filed and paid. And the other thing that I always thought interesting, anybody who ever filed an amended return automatically got an employee tax compliance letter, which I never thought was fair.
Yeah, those, like I said, the Employee Tax Compliance Branch is better than it used to be, which is, trust me, an extremely low bar from when I dealt with them years ago and had several non-productive discussions with the person that was running the branch at the time. I very rarely yell or curse at executives, but I made exceptions for that particular person just because of the way they operated. So you don't even want to have to go down that road. Because, even if you do nothing wrong, you're filing, you owe a little bit, you can't pay it in full, it's not that big of a deal. It just becomes a big hassle that you don't really want to have to deal with. So that's why we talk about filing on time. And that is extremely important. The filing on time, even if you can't pay, the filing on time is extremely important. So just to try and give yourself a little bit better headspace so you don't have to deal with stuff like that, because we all as employees have to deal with enough. So I don't want anybody to have to deal with anything extra.
So wait a minute here. You're telling me that you don't curse and yell at executives?
Usually not. Sometimes I mock. Uh but usually I do not try and yell and scream at executives or curse them. Now the opposite is not true. Many of them, have yelled at me and cursed at me, and I just sort of laugh. But no, it takes a lot for me to get that riled when somebody is just that anti-employee. And I felt that at one point the employee tax compliance was that way. I don't believe they are now, but I do believe that they are. Uh, they were then, and now it's still a very sticky situation every time you have to deal with them, and employees' hearts drop when they get letters from employee tax compliance. We deal with it all the time. I'm sure my brethren across the country deal with it, with employees coming to them when they say, I got this letter from employee tax compliance and it sounds very dire and very serious, and are they going to come and chop off my hands, etc. And it's like, no, just let's take a look at the letter and figure out what happened and give them a response. Let your manager know what's going on. And that's another good thing to do, is keep your manager in the loop if there are any issues, because it's much better to have that discussion. If that stuff comes to your manager and they know about it, then they can sit there and say, oh yeah, the employees talked to me, it's not a big deal, we know about it, we can work this out, versus being blindsided by it. So this is one of the things that I always tell employees to, if they're going to have issues in not paying, or whatever the reason is, uh let your manager know what's going on. They can help possibly deflect some of this when it does come down to them.
Yes, I do think that it's good to let your manager know your side of the story early on in the process before it all filters down to that manager. They don't always get that early on in the process. So I think that's very good advice. Let's move on to another issue we've talked about before. It has been the subject of discussions between NTEU and the Human Capital Office of IRS many times. And there's been a recent meeting on this. We want to talk about PAR, PAR, PAR actions. Now, a PAR action is a personnel action that a manager takes. And let's say, for example, you have a career ladder promotion or some other kind of action that's supposed to happen, and your manager doesn't get it done on time. It can cost you money, at least for a while, before it's all fixed later on. NTU has been talking to the national management about issues with PAR actions, but some managers being too slow to get them in the system. That's part of the manager's job to do that. Uh, so I guess the question now is, Duncan, do you think NTU is making any headway with the management on getting the frontline managers more active and getting them to do these PAR actions on a timely basis?
I do think we're making headway. I give a lot of credit to our national president, Tony Reardon, and our national vice president, Doreen Greenwald, who've been all over this, because it got especially bad. It was bad before the pandemic, but during the pandemic, it became very, there were a lot of things that were not being done timely with PAR actions. And it was partly the manager and partly the system's fault for not getting these input. And it just got to a ridiculous level, and they've been hammering them and talking them on these discussions. And our national head of negotiations as well, Ken Moffat, and saying, we've got to get this figured out. You've got to get this fixed, because these employees are suffering. Either the steps aren't being done correctly, the grade that they're supposed to career ladder, supposed to jump to, they're not getting it timely. Now, employees do get made whole because they will get interest from the time it should have been done, but who knows how long that could have been. And the time frame on fixing these power actions has gone from several months to now a couple of pay periods, which is a huge jump. So, of course, we in a perfect world, we'd like to have no problems with power actions. We'd like to see everything done timely, you know, uh, grade and step increases being done correctly and everybody getting done on time. Unfortunately, we don't live in a perfect world. So as long as we can get the corrections done in a very quick manner and within 2 or 3 pay periods is a very quick manner, then it at least helps. So that person who's waiting on that grade or that step increase is not sitting there hanging out for months going, what the heck is going on and when am I going to get this?
And I think the key here, and I've talked about this before as a former manager, it's hard for someone who's never done that job to understand just how much work is thrown at a frontline manager. The workload is almost impossible for a lot of these jobs, especially the one I had. And so, if nothing else, I've always said that there needed to be a better way of kind of giving people a heads up that you've got a par action coming. And when you had that, I always got them done on time. Now, if something happened with the system where I didn't get that heads up on it, sometimes I was late, and I hated to do that because I knew, I was looking out for my employees at that time and didn't want them to be late and getting something that they're deserving of. And and so this is a very important step forward. So I think it's a manner of letting the managers know this is a priority and helping them, putting it in their face, saying, "Hey, you got to do a par action." It's not that difficult to do in terms of just getting it done on a computer system. It's just a matter of you got so much other work to do. Don't get buried under where you can't get that done, and knowing that that's a priority. So I think that's working, and I'm glad to see that. And just helping the managers know, number one, it's a priority, and number two, give them heads up when it's due. I think that's the best thing. Yeah, it sounds like that's the sort of thing that is happening now.
I think it is. It's reorganizing the priorities because this should be one of the biggest with flashing red lights to say, make sure you take care of this. And I do give credit to the IRS for listening to NTU, realizing that this has been a big issue and working on correcting the problem. So it is getting better. It's not where we want it yet, but it is getting much, much better. And hopefully it'll continue to improve.
I think employee retention is that's something that used to get lip service when I was with the service. And I do think that the agency is now beginning to understand that employee retention has got to be a much bigger priority than the past, don't you?
Absolutely. Aside from the fact that we've been understaffed and we've got these funds from the Inflation Reduction Act that are going to be coming in over the next several years to get this hiring better. But how much does it cost to fully train somebody, get them up there, get them working, they're being productive, and then because of system failures or you have a small minority of managers who are still in the mindset of the beatings will continue until morale improves, things like that, that they leave. And so we've spent all this money training an employee, getting them up, getting them ready, helping them, having them help taxpayers to only lose them. So yeah, employee retention at every division, at every occupation is extremely important. So we always need to be looking at that.
Well, you already alluded to this, so let's talk about it some more. We talked about this recently, and we know that we're already well into our fiscal year. It ends at the end of September of 2023. And we, I would say we as an agency, even though I'm retired, but the agency of IRS is now starting to implement plans to start hiring people. We have a new commissioner in place. There are now plans in motion to start hiring people under this Inflation Reduction Act. The announcement made about a week or so ago talked about, I think, 10,000 people this fiscal year, and maybe 20,000 next fiscal year. So do you see those wheels turning in a positive way, Duncan, as far as getting this done, particularly in this fiscal year of 10,000, a pretty energetic and a nice goal to have, but do you think we'll make it?
I think that they eventually will. Now, how much, again, going back to the retention that we'll have, is going to be an interesting question. But the hiring is going much smoother. There are some issues. USA Jobs and the types of jobs that we're seeing, and how they're treating internal versus external employees and things of that nature. There's some rough spots there that National NTU is very aware of and working on. But they realize that we do need to hire more people. They're hiring more people and even bringing in contractors to be able to pull in more people, to be able to hire more. And, not only in customer service, not only in, the field assistance world where they're taking it, but we need to get enforcement as well. Where are the revenue agents? Where are the revenue officers? Where are the tax compliance officers? Needs to be more hiring in taxpayer advocate to take care of the seemingly never-ending issues with our systems that taxpayers have that want to be taken care of, that they're falling through the cracks. The yeah, it's just one of those situations where the hiring is starting to work better. Hopefully, it'll continue to, as the wheels turn. Hopefully, it'll get smoother and smoother and accelerate a little bit more, so that we can get to the hiring that we need, and again retain as much of these employees as we can, because we're going to have an awful lot of retirees over the next several years. We talk about tsunami waves of retirees, things of that nature, and I don't know about that type of situation, but there's an awful high percentage of IRS employees, because we have a very seasoned workforce that can retire in the next couple of years, and we're going to be needing to replace that, and we want to try and get some of that knowledge imparted to people before they walk out the door.
Excuse me there. I had to kind of show the fact that I'm got a bad cold here. I want to ask one other question on this. As we move into a hiring mode, what should people be thinking if they like, for example, to be classroom instructors? They enjoy being coaches, on the job instructors, that kind of thing. Do you expect there'll be any in-person training? Will we be doing all of this virtually? What are you hearing as far as the initial training as people get on board?
That is a great question. That's one of the things that we've talked about locally and nationally to IRS, and I think IRS understands that there's a great value in-person training. The pandemic training that we had to be all virtual, of course, and I think that suffered some because of the fact that you're not getting the back and forth that you usually would with an in-person training. Um, where some that to me is where some of the best learning is, where people are bringing up questions, and it starts to go a back and forth discussion between the instructor and the person who asked the question, and then a couple other people are asking questions. So it gets a good back and forth discussion going. People then are learning from real world experiences. So we're hoping that there's going to continue to be an expansion of back to face learning. Will it be as much as it was pre-pandemic? I don't know if we'll ever get back to those levels, but I hope we get somewhere close.
Hey, Duncan, your final comment for this podcast.
Yeah, my final comment, and this might upset some people, but I saw this morning and it just absolutely drove me up a wall. Certain political figure made a comment about someone who had done something wrong, but they should be, taken into consideration that they were a white male and Christian. And that just took my mind and went boom. So if it was an African American Muslim female, it would be wrong. Some of the ideas that come out now are just mind blowing to me. And I just go back to, one of the things that I imparted to my daughter Madison, that thankfully she learned, race, creed, color, sex, national origin, none of that matters. None of it. Is a person a-hole, or are they not an a-hole? That's what it amounts to. Did somebody break the law, or did they not break the law? Those are the things that matter to me. not, you know, as an older white male, it kills me when the older white males of the world, or those that follow that type of thinking, they should be ruling the world. No, everybody should be, taking a look at these decisions, regardless of race, creed, color, sex, age, the whole nine yards. So just that's my rant for this podcast.
You're making me look bad because my comment is a lot less controversial than that. Because all I was going to say is that this, I don't know about you, but this is the time of year when allergies drive me nuts. I don't know if it's true where you live, but having lived in the Midwest almost my entire life, this is the time of year I love spring, but man, the allergies drive me nuts. So if you're having problems with your allergies, talk to your doctor, take something for it. Uh, don't suffer silently as I did for years. I actually found a way to lessen that load. I want to thank you for watching and listening to our Chapter 49 podcast. Thank Duncan Giles again for joining me as always. We do this as weekly as we can, and we do it, Duncan and I, we take time out of our busy schedules because you tell us that you think it's of some value, so we'll continue as long as you folks are watching and listening and providing the comments that you always do. And we would say once again, please enjoy life. It's spring. It's a good time to enjoy life. And as Duncan always says, work is important, but it's not life. Put work in its proper perspective. Make sure you do a good job, but always make sure you have time for your personal life and your own family. And along those lines, again, please be safe and be kind.